So, Will, what did you think about the final season of The Bear?
So I have to admit that it took me a while to get into season 5. I know I texted you about it, I think maybe last week when I started it, that I was just not feeling it, but 'cause I think part of it was just the construct of how they structured this season where it was, it was a single day, and it was, definitely a bold decision for me, and it wasn't working for me, but I stuck with it, and then I think by episode 4, Ribs, that was where it started to turn for me. And I think for me, it just showed how, but throughout all the dysfunction, how these characters truly are like a family. So that, and it continued to build. And so for me, my favorite episode of the season, I think, was episode 7, Caramel. And to me, it was like the spiritual successor to Forks as far as showing how these characters have evolved over time. So that was where I was like, okay, I'm back, I'm fully back. I was already back on board, but I think that was just like, oh yeah, that was like my favorite episode of the season. The finale was good. I mean, it did what it needed to do, but episode 7 was my favorite.
Yeah, I can only echo what you just said about episode 7, so I will not go into a spiel about it. I will go into a soapbox moment about the actual series finale because I don't know if it was good. It was confusing to me in the sense that I am still trying to wrap my mind around the interview that occurred. I know Carmy needs out of the bear. I understood that.
Yeah.
I've watched all of the seasons, and more importantly, I watched the 4th season a few
Mm.
times. So I feel like that was just a weird monologue to have
Mm.
during that interview. And yeah, he's reflecting on that night and the caramel episode and arguably the whole day. But that one service and it felt like, man, and maybe this is because I have a background in hiring and recruiting people. That kind of answer to a question does not mean like, oh, let's hire you for
Yeah.
a
Oh no, I didn't think you got
completely
the
different
job.
job in architecture.
Yeah.
So to me, in a way, I was waiting. I was like, is there gonna be like a something at the end of the credits that says that he just stayed with the bear? That would honestly make a little bit more
Yeah.
sense to me, considering that moment he has in that
Yeah.
office. So that took me way out of it. But in terms of this overall season, I was the same way with you for a lot of what you've already said in the sense that it takes a minute to adjust. And
Yeah.
then when it starts going, when you realize what is happening in terms of the one day construct, it's suddenly like, okay, I'm over
Yeah.
that. I'm in it now. Moving forward, you get episode 7. Like, I couldn't have said it any better than spiritual successor to Forks. And that's because there's character growth.
Yeah.
And what separates Forks from Caramel is you're not just having character growth with Cousin. You're having it
Right.
with all of these characters who you have gotten to know and just the bear itself in
Yeah.
terms of this restaurant. And so and just the success, and also in a way it's a successor to a lot of season 1. There's a lot of
Yeah.
this final season that echoes back to this place found some money in season 2, but that doesn't mean that like they are meant to have a restaurant here because good lord, all the signs
Yeah.
just say close it down.
Yeah.
But I it's bittersweet because I don't
Yeah.
think this show necessarily needs to go on, but
Yeah.
I also when you're in it, you are so in it. It's tiring and you just start saying chef to people
Yep.
and the facts
Yeah.
are around and the facts had some great moments in this final season as well, and it's just callbacks to what am I doing with my hands, but
Mhm.
also a callback to I feel good doing this. And it's people pointing out and pushing gently other people to be like, "No, no, no. Don't be afraid of
Yeah.
this. You're supposed to do this. You're
Yeah.
meant to." So I am sad to see the show go, but I'm also glad that it ends on a higher note than but I also think overall, looking back, you're never gonna do like they did season 1, good.
Yeah.
Season 2 was just something else. It was just a class of its own,
Yeah.
and they never really got back there. But at the same time, every season has at least one episode.
Mhm.
Season 3, I don't know. I still very interesting, the choices that were made, but I also just wanna point out, one thing is that I've thought about in terms of this final season there. Arguably, when you compare this season to the previous 2 seasons, this is
Mhm.
the least season that has to do with Carmy.
Yeah.
'Cause Carmy's finale was the conversation from last season with his mom.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
plain and simple. And so that is why there was so much more focus on Sydney. There was so much more focus. The whole season starts with Tina.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and who's great because it's a scene referring to her flashback episode.
Yep.
So they did a good job about also reminding you how far these characters have come and all the information you know about them and their fears and how they ended up in this place to get go. I mean, the callback to Secretary of Dead Moms Club. So there's a lot there, and so I'm glad that yeah, I'm very
Yeah.
satisfied with the way
Yeah.
that the show ended.
Yeah, same. Same. I mean, I think when you're talking about, for example, Carmy's really his arc really did seem. You're right. I think it did end with that scene with him and his mom and that day, and then of course to carry it forward a little in this season with her whenever she does come to the restaurant and she's thumbing through the cooking books and stuff and seeing all that. But that was almost like epilogue to that to that moment. But Donna's at a good place now. It seemed at least for this one day. I know Sugar was all worried about Sugar dealing with her challenges as far as just being a new mom and I'm glad you brought up Tina because Tina really was I mean, it's hard. I'm really trying hard to say who was the MVP. Was it Sydney or was it Tina? Because as far as this season, and I think Tina by a hair because she was like all the things are blowing up in this restaurant. And like whenever they had the in the earlier episodes when they blurt out about the plan, as far as that Carmy was leaving, and then and how they had to pull it together for this one night because they're thinking that that this is going to be the potential night that the Starman was going to show up, which we actually, I know I texted you over the weekend as far as if you remember the Starman from the previous season episode. I think it was where there was where it was a snowstorm. I think it was. Yeah, but yeah, we do learn that Peter Clark, came, but it wasn't the Starman was not the dude in this episode at night, but it was actually earlier.
Which
Yeah,
watching season 4, you kind of get the idea that that
yeah,
was who the
yeah.
Starman was.
Yeah, but I honestly I have forgotten that. So for me, with the finale when they do learn about getting not only getting the star, but not just one but two, that really worked for me. And to your point, as far as like that was the moment where I was like, I am going to definitely miss this show and miss these characters and miss the chaos that comes with the bear because you're right. I mean, for me, I think I agree with you. Season 2 was definitely the bear at its best because I think at that juncture, we start to learn about Marcus and Tina and of course we have referenced already Forks, but that was following up from Fishes, which is another one of those episodes of the bear that everyone like references as far as like peak bear. And then season 1 was like my next favorite season as far as just laying the foundation for the series. And then I know it's Prisoner in the Moment and maybe I'll change over time, but even though it took me a while for season 5 was probably my third favorite season, and then fourth for the fourth season, and then the third. And going back on when we talked about the third season, I actually, at the time, I did. It's not to say it was for me. It wasn't that it was a bad season. It just felt like it was incomplete, like an unfinished season. So I never really like. I was never as frustrated with season 3 as a lot of viewers were. But in the comparison to the other ones, yeah, I mean, it is probably the weakest of the 5. But yeah, I mean, I'm definitely going to miss this show for sure. It's definitely you're right. Whenever you mentioned about the people saying chef, my son had a birthday party this weekend, and one of his friends said, "Yes, chef." I was just like, yeah, I was like the bear, and she was like, "Yeah, yeah," So it's just one of those things that's just entered into the into the zeitgeist as far as like this show and things that people say and hands and all the things that come across in the show, and you just you have that kinship as far as like that cultural awareness of whenever something has like really crossed over as far as an IP. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm definitely going to be missing the show, and then also just Richie's, just going back real quickly to fishes, excuse me, forks and caramel, and just the thing that stood out for me for that was just the whole thing that went down when Carmy dropped the plate and how normally in the character growth was really evident there with things just didn't go sideways and Richie was like, "We got you." And even like whenever they ran out of the dessert and they had to like whip something up really fast and it worked out. That was yeah, that those moments are just like, yeah, that's where the growth really happened with the show and why I think the show just it resonates for so many people.
I want our listeners to go back and listen to our discussion about season 3 of The Bear and then tell Will what he really thought at the time. Anyways, that is it. That is it for us. You can find me on social media at SJ Belmont, SJBLMONT. Will, where can our listeners find you?
Yes, you can find me on all the socials at Will and Polk. I think I know I may have made some criticisms about season 3, like I said before,
You were
but I know
basically like, "I'm done with this show."
I thought that
It's
was
over. I was like, "Man, it's gonna take a lot for him to watch season 4."
maybe who knows? Like I said, it's still
Anyway,
I'm true to my word. It is my we I did say it's my least
yes, you
favorite.
did.
Yeah,
Yes, you did.
I did. So it's not like I bumped it up to number 1. But yeah, you can find me on all the socials at Will M Polk, WILLMPOLK.
You can follow our crew on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Scene and Nerd, on Blue Sky, friend us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram and Threads at Scene Nerd, and visit our website, www.sceneandnerdpodcast.com. But most importantly, rate, follow, and comment on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever your podcasts. Good night, geek out. You're welcome.